Hello and welcome everyone to today's webinar. My name is Alexi Lynch. I'm the Business Manager at Ironbark Sustainability. Can you hear me and see that screen? Before we move on, this is our unofficial way of checking. People that are there that know us, Brett, Faye, you guys know how to use this. Can you jump into the Q&A box and tell me that you can see that amazingly brilliant Pink Floyd cover and quote? Thanks, Tim. You can hear and see. That's enough for me. Beauty. I'm going to mute whoever it is in the background. I think that was Michelle. All right. Welcome. This webinar series is about smart lighting in the real world, and today we're talking about smart controls, smart control procurement. And the focus is going to be very much around real projects and real councils and guests who we can see below who have been involved in these projects on the ground. Our guests and our good selves here at Ironbark hopefully can be speaking from our experience of decades of combined experience to help save everyone some time and effort and ensure successful projects. There are a lot of fantastic resources out there that provide excellent background information, detailed templated specs that might assist along the way, but can be rendered pretty useless unless you have a decent level of understanding of the technology, financial implications before using them, and how to actually make projects work. There are tried and tested ways to procure and install smart controls on DNSP owned and council owned assets to get the best outcomes. And we're going to go through and explain how it works in practice. Today's other presenters, Paul Brown, Ironbark's Managing Director. We've got Josh Salter from the City of Greater Geelong, and Michelle Van Gerevink from City of Darebin, who's going to talk about her work at City of Glen Eira, and Tom Walker from SA Power Networks. I'd like to acknowledge First Nation people throughout this land, acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders as the traditional owners, and pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and also the elders from other communities. We acknowledge that the land on which we meet and talk and discuss is a place of age-old ceremonies of celebration, initiation and renewal, and this land was never ceded. This is us. We work with councils around Australia on energy efficiency, renewables, climate programs, council assets and the broader community. That's some of our Melbourne office there. We've got about 36, 7, 8 staff at the moment, depending on where we draw the line. Today is going to be casual, pretty chilled as always. Note that only presenters can be heard. It's not like Zoom during this presentation. You can jump into the GoToWebinar question box at any time and ask questions. Try and be as specific as possible and direct them to who you want. If you've got someone you'd like to answer them, and we'll do our best. Jump in and also disagree with us if you like. We've got no dramas with that whatsoever. And note that this webinar is being recorded. I stress that point about questioning and speaking up. We are really comfortable with people saying that's not my understanding about how things work, or that's not my understanding about how that project went. We'll try and answer it, or we'll even get you on to the next session to talk about what you've been doing, anything that can assist in helping the greater good and the sector along the way. We had about 57, I think, registrations for this one, including these councils and organisations here, so you can jump on and get the slides afterwards. You don't have to take note of all this. An interesting mix, mainly New South Wales this time, and Vic and Queensland represented as well, but a nice little mix from around Australia, and a very even understanding, I guess, of involvement in smart lighting projects. We've got the gamut from those who have been heavily involved or involved in project teams, those that have never started or about to begin. And here are your questions. Not as many questions as we normally get, but we'll get to these as we go along. And of course, you can jump on and ask any questions throughout. And this is what you said from the last webinar as well. Some of the spelling there really positive. Come on. But that was very generally positive in general. So thank you very much. We do take it on board. We note they're a bit rushed, and we were talking beforehand about trying to make sure we get through this one within time. And if not, we'll take that on board further and maybe make the next one a 90-minute webinar. We try our best. All right. Smart City, it gathers data from smart devices and sensors, and it shares it through smart communications. And then you can use software to create valuable information and services. Public lighting is generally considered the backbone of a smart city, as most of you know, but in our very quick 2-minute refresher, that's because they're ubiquitous. Wherever there are people, there are generally lights. They are high. They have a good line of sight for communications, and they're already attached to power. Smart lighting, smart LED lighting incorporates sensors and communication devices to allow lights essentially to communicate with other nearby lights and controlled by something externally at the city level. So, simple definition, lighting connected to the internet, so you control it and do things remotely. Even simpler definitions here, a light that can talk to a network. You can talk to it, it can talk to you. You can use the data that gets sent to do stuff. This is the humble PE cell that we have. Most of our lights around Australia have got these old buggers attached to them, and basically all they do is light goes on and light goes off, light goes on, light goes off. Traditionally, that's all these things have done PE cells. However, smart PE cells have what's called a network interface card, or a NIC, that makes the light smart. You don't theoretically need to have a smart PE cell. This NIC or network interface card could actually be within the luminaire itself. In Australia at the moment anyway, this is the most likely scenario though, and so for all intents and purposes, this is kind of what you need. Doesn't mean it'll always be this way, but that's the way we talk about it at the moment. So now this PE cell is now a node, and it can talk to other nodes. Can connect also to access points or gateways, a physical box, if you like, on a pole that can then talk to networks that can be hardwired or remote, and a database or cloud or software to manipulate it and do interesting things. To use another analogy for the home, think about the light or that node on the far left as all the devices you have in your home. So your TV, your lights, your computer, your DVD player, or your Sega Master System if you're truly old. The gateway or access point is like the router in your house. It's connecting it all together. And that final thing, the cloud, means that at work you can get into your router and control your lights, turn your heaters on at home, turn your DVD player on, or whatever it might be. That's the simplest way to think about it. It's also handy to separate the benefits of smart lighting applications into your direct lighting benefits, so dimming and adaptive lighting, so what the light itself is going to do, and your non-lighting benefits, CCTV, air quality, telecommunications, heat, all the sort of stuff. Once we start looking into these things, car park centres, voltage monitoring, the world is absolutely your oyster. In Australia, 600,000 energy efficient lights are up throughout the country on distribution business owned networks alone. Most of those do not have smart PE cells. Possibly 30% are future-proofed, meaning that the base in the future you'll be able to put a smart cell on there, but only a few are actually enabled for smart use. So the capital cities, 15,000 odd in Melbourne. Cities like Wyndham have got their VCATs, maybe 50, 60,000 all up. The majority of ACTs, 45,000 lights as well. So we're looking at probably only 3 or 4% of all of the lights, though, that are smart enabled. Globally, really interesting recent study of cities that have over 100,000 people show that most governments are not interested in rolling out smart controls at the moment because of the cost or because they didn't see the value. However, those cities that have gone about changing their lights with smart controls have no buyer's remorse. They're very happy, and we'll hear from an Australian example today. The growth in the installation of smart controls has stalled a bit in the last couple of years. However, the tendering and the supplying of smart controls has tripled over that same time. So it's mainly still internationally energy authorities, utilities, DNSPs that have been the main driver of smart control installations. But cities are becoming a bit more of a big player. COVID has stalled some of these projects, but generally it's been business as usual. Street lighting with smart controls is certainly a shovel-ready project for most cities. So hopefully with infrastructure stimulus projects in Australia, we'll see a big uptake. All right, I'm going to hand over to Paul Brown. Where are you, Paul?
Lex, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. Over to you.
Okay, thanks, Lex. Just so you're aware, I am having internet difficulties, so I can't actually see any of the slides, so I'll need you to drive them. But I will do my best to do so. So, getting into smart controls and what councils need to think about when considering smart systems in their cities. The first thing to keep in mind is that 90% of outdoor lighting for a council is owned and operated by the distribution businesses, and 10% is owned and operated by the councils. So we're going to be consistently talking about this variance and then picking out what is it that you can do in those two different applications, DNSP applications and council applications. So what smart controls can you use? As we talked about in the webinar last week, so if you missed that webinar, feel free to jump online. There are slides available, and we will be putting the recording of that webinar up shortly. But as we talked about last week, for DNSP-owned assets around the country, the products that you put up are largely controlled by the DNSPs. So specifications and other things that councils want to achieve can only be done through negotiation or working closely with your distributor around approvals. We're actually going to, right now, talk to Tom Walker from Sappen, who has been working for 5, 6, 7, 8 years on smart lighting and LED lighting projects with councils. And we're keen to hear from him about what is the perspective of distributors when considering smart controls. Tom, are you there?
I'm here, but I think I need to press *1 so everyone can hear me. Is that right?
No, you don't press anything, Tom. You're doing an awesome job.
The American girl told me I had to do that, but but I won't.
You should not always trust the Americans. Okay, so Tom, perhaps if you can introduce yourself, your role, and your background, and then just talk a little bit about what's happening in South Australia around smart controls for street lighting.
Okay, very quickly, Tom Walker, I'm a chartered accountant. I've been at Sappen and its subsidiaries for about 12 years. I'm always involved in business development initiatives, but also developing in a holistic sense, developing the commercial arrangements that support our new, mostly sort of long-term services that we try to offer customers, very much involved in public lighting, for example, and now more recently into smart lighting. We've thought about, our goal is to make sure that we're capable of providing our customers with the services that they're looking for. We know that we've known for a long time that smart lighting has been on the horizon, and we've been trying to get ourselves into a position to be able to do that. And I think we're just about there now. We did a couple of pilots over the last couple of years. I've spoken about these at conferences, which were done on our dime. We were looking for ways to get better information about our distribution network at the ends of it, and we therefore supported a couple of pilots in a couple of towns in South Australia, which seem to be working quite well at the moment. Before we did that, we went through a procurement process. I think I might get another question about that, so I won't go into that, to identify which technology we wanted to use, and we've gone ahead with that. And now we're working on we're moving from the pilot phase to the trial phase. And the trial phase is where we're looking for we've set up some high-level terms and conditions and pricing for customers to choose to opt in to a smart lighting trial that they kick off. So that's where we're at the moment.
And so in terms of the pilot, so you're talking about pilots, then trials, and presumably at some point in the future, it will be rollout or business as usual. Why are you being so careful? And how are you working with the councils on, like obviously councils are pretty keen to get this sort of technology out reasonably quickly. But how do you navigate that process of wanting to get out there and deliver these sorts of services and products with being careful and moving slowly enough so that it's systematic across your DNSP?
Okay, so a few things there. So we're dealing with every council that comes to talk to us about smart lighting. We talk to, whether it's for us to provide them with a holistic service or whether they're looking to integrate another smart city project that they're doing with lighting, that they'd like to have it all sort of in the same package, if you know what I mean. Cautious hasn't really been because we've been cautious. We've been really keen to do it. The main problem we've had is coming up with a business model that works from a small start that doesn't involve a huge upfront capital cost. So we've spent a lot of time trying to find a way to get this started in an organic sense that we can transition from a small project to a larger one, and it's economic at all levels.
So the overall business case and numbers are really important, and it takes you a while to navigate through what an appropriate system is that can deliver that long term.
Yeah, so I mean, there's all of the technical stuff in the background, but there's also I guess we formed a view that there would be to try and get the optimal value. We had a guess at what that would, where councils would be happy to do these sorts of projects, and we're testing that at the moment with our current offerings.
And how do you interact with other DNSPs? Like obviously there's 15 DNSPs in the country. A number of them are having similar discussions and conversations and trials. How are you talking to or working with other distributors around the country?
Well, when I can get their attention, we actually do have a good, robust discussion from Western Australia right across to the eastern states. We get together on a semi-regular basis to talk through just the issues that we're seeing. We've had some difficulty with getting everyone to be as open as they can, because they're all going through commercial processes and trying to keep everything confidential as much as they can. So that's been the main barrier to open and frank discussion. But we just have a general dialogue going all the time.
Yep. Okay. And if a council, if I was a council staff member, I've got 2,000 lights I'm planning to replace to LEDs, and I have firm views about, the smart controls I want in there, dimming, potentially traffic counting or other sensing, and I come to you, how would you talk to that council? What would you say to them?
First of all, I'd say that when you're doing your planning, please talk to us as early as we can, because this is really a strategic partnering opportunity. There's definitely synergies in this for both DNSPs and councils, and I think that the economies of scale are only going to be able to be leveraged if we all work together on this. We're working with our local transport authority, Department of Transport in South Australia, on that very issue, so that we're looking for ways that we can leverage make the optimal investment for the best value. So again, getting back to the strategic partnering thing, there's obvious benefits for for smart lighting for both councils in terms of the opportunity for control, for dimming, but there's also we think at least there should be material benefits in terms of maintenance, certainly with quick turnaround. for repairs and maintenance sort of stuff. So we've all got parts of the business case which will only get the best value if we work together on it.
Yep. So getting in early, talking to the distributor helps to them to have
absolutely
the appropriate
and you know we don't have all the answers right now. We're learning as we go, just as everybody else is. And so, but our method of learning is by trying, failing fast, if you know what I mean. Trying to integrate other systems and getting some things up there so that we can all play with it and see how it goes.
And I understand with the pilots you mentioned, you've been working with the councils on those pilots as well.
Absolutely. Look, the councils were reasonably passive, but in fact, what we're finding is they're now wanting to expand those pilots into the trials. So they're looking at procuring their own PSLs for their car parks and basically to smarten up the infrastructure that they own that we have nothing to do with, but we're happy to bring that into the same system and therefore we get the benefits. So we're not doing things twice, we're not doubling up anyway.
Yeah, okay, so that's really interesting. So you're seeing that councils are looking at the systems with SAP and not just as a street lighting opportunity, but beyond out into open space and car parking and other things. And SAP is obviously open to that, spreading that to other assets out off the street.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Tom. We might leave it at that, but I'm sure there will be questions that we go, and at the end we'll be doing Q&A, so please stay on the line and appreciate your input. We're going to move on. Great, thanks, Tom. We're going to move on and talk a bit about some of the trends we're seeing around the country. It's very helpful hearing from a distributor and where they're at. In terms of overall trends, we are generally seeing that distributors and councils are very keen to share information. There's obviously lots of, not so much this year, but there's lots of conferences, webinars and other things which are sharing data. We are also seeing that a lot of the councils are very keen on thinking through and understanding things like governance. So for example, understanding the data, where it comes from, who controls it, who owns it, and even through to things like who is the organisation who decides on dimming levels or lighting controls. Obviously, we are now talking about, in a way, shared infrastructure where both councils and distributors are getting benefit from it. So that dialogue on how the control of the assets occurs is moving well beyond what was previously a much more passive relationship between the two organisations. The other thing that distributors and councils that we are seeing is there's been, over the last 5 years or so, there has been a discussion of being smart ready. And in effect, that means that you have a socket to put in a smart P cell, and we are moving on to discussing things like a socket for Zaga cells and others, but not necessarily putting the cells in or the smart controls themselves. We are seeing more and more projects now where the smart cells are being installed, even if the functionality is not being utilised right now, and the functionality might be a 1-2 year process away. And the reason that's being installed now is mostly because of economics. While a contractor is in the field replacing an LED, it makes sense to put in a smart control as well, while running a separate and new project in 12 or 24 months adds a lot of project costs into the system. So we are, as Lex mentioned earlier, buyer's remorse for smart system is 0 or very low. So we are seeing more and more projects not being smart ready, actually rolling out and delivering. All right. So as mentioned, all around the country, the distributors are talking about or thinking about or not thinking very much about smart lighting. Where are these pilots? You can hopefully see, I imagine you're driving the slides very well, Lex. that there are pilots in most jurisdictions. What we have seen though is that some of those pilots are real and designed to understand and improve everyone's knowledge on how to deliver smart lighting and how to understand the value. And there are a number which are designed to say to councils or others, we are working on this, we will get back to you when we're ready. And essentially as a delaying tactic. So even though there may be trials or pilots all around the country, there's high variance as to whether distributors are moving through or transitioning through to larger scale trials and in fact business as usual. All right, what about councils? Councils and smart lighting. Where do they come into all of this? We're now going to talk to Michelle Van Gervink, who is actually at the City of Darebin now, but was at the City of Glen Eira, working with United Energy, one of Australia's distributors, on installing connected smart lighting to an unmetered distributor network. Michelle, are you there?
Yes. Hi, Paul.
Greetings. Hope all is going well in the City of Darebin.
Yes, all going well in lockdown, of course.
Yes, of course. For those who are allowed to go outside, enjoy the sunshine. In Victoria, unfortunately, that's not the case that often. But here we are talking about street lighting, which we love. Can you tell us a little bit about what happened at Glen Eira?
Sure. So, while I was at Glen Eira, we planned an upgrade of our major road street lights, and as we were going through that process, we started to think about installing smart lighting, and I started to look at the options with Ironbark's help, of course, and yeah, we were quite keen to make the lights smart. It made sense to me that the technology was there. Let's make them smart. But we hit a few hurdles. So Glen Eira's lights are mostly in the United Energy area, and the United Energy had not approved the smart cell, so it wasn't really an option. So we started to negotiate with them to put in a pilot where we put smart cells on 200 lights. So that took quite a bit of negotiation.
Can I ask, Michelle, why did you want to put smart lighting in? What was the core driver for council?
So we were looking at smart city technology like more broadly across the council, and there was a bit of interest around smart cities, and I just thought, as we were looking at lights, and as Lex said before, it makes sense. You've got lights connected to power, and they're all throughout the city. So as a backbone to a smart city, lighting made sense. But we were all sort of, it was very new for us at council on what the possibilities were. But it just, to me, it didn't make sense to do an upgrade and not make them smart enabled, so that we could take advantage of that technology in the future, or upon installation immediately.
So what's it like trying to negotiate to put smart controls in on a distributor asset? How's it go talking to distributors around this?
Yes, challenging. So to put it mildly, really. Look, it took a lot longer than I thought it would, and was a lot more difficult. The first meeting was mainly, them saying why they couldn't do it. And it took a lot of meetings before we could, get to a solution. So there was lots of reasons why they didn't want to. And the key, I guess, advice I'd give is find the tech people inside the DNSPs, because they were much more receptive. You know, once we had, because they can see that this is the way of the future and that all lighting will go this way. So they were much more amenable to the conversation.
Yep. And nothing like giving a tech person something new to play with, I'm sure.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So in terms of council's role in all of this, what, I was going to ask this question, why shouldn't councils just leave it to the DNSP? But I think you've just answered it from what you're saying. Without the council being involved, then your project wouldn't have got off the ground.
No, absolutely not. And, you know, when I asked why hadn't they approved the smart cells, and they kind of sort of shook their head and went, well, no one's asked us. So, you know, they're certainly not going to do it on their own. They will need prodding, and they also were not really seeing the benefits that they would reap. And Tom pointed out before that there are mutual benefits, both for councils and DNSPs, and also, you know, safety for the community. You know, much more reliable lighting. You know, if a light's not working, you know immediately. You don't have to wait for a resident. Things like that. So there's a lot of benefits, and the tricky part is who pays for it, because obviously it adds to the capital cost.
Yep. And
ideally it would be shared between DNSPs and councils.
Okay, so Glen Eira now have a couple of hundred connected unmetered street lights that are dimming and trimming every night, and you have now moved to Darebin Council. Darebin Council has the privilege of having 3 distributors within your council area, which must be exciting for you. Are there anything interesting on the lighting front at Darebin?
So we are certainly looking to upgrade our major roads, and hopefully in the next couple of years. And yes, I'm really looking forward to negotiating with 3 DNSPs this time.
Well, that is awesome. And we're going to actually jump off, but thank you for your time. And if you can stick around for the Q&A session, that'd be great.
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks, Michelle. Cheers. Okay.
Paul, just so you know, I'm not sure where you are at. I didn't realise you didn't even have access to a screen, but yes, we are moving along here well, and we are now on to the next one, which is when are we ready for the rollout of all of the tech issues we've had in the last 15 years. This is a weird one, but back to you. Let me know if you're missing things. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's all right. I'll use the force and tell you through my mind when to change the slides. So when are we ready to roll out? We've heard from both Michelle and Tom that the cost side of things are critical. So in most areas that most councils we're working with and distributors, identifying the value is critical. So Lex showed earlier and Michelle reinforced some of the value propositions. Where we are seeing cost savings, real cost savings and benefit is in lighting control and dimming and trimming. In the other area that is relevant to think about is around compliance, dimming and compliance. So this chart that Lex is showing shows you a street in Glen Eira before and after the upgrade. As you can see on the top left, there's a lot of red areas, which means they were non-compliant to Australian standards. And on the bottom left, there is a number of, essentially it's now compliant to Australian standards. So we've improved compliance, even though we're improving and reducing energy use. And ultimately, from a value perspective, this has the impact of significantly reducing risk, mainly for the council, who's the road management authority, but obviously everyone benefits when there is less accidents and improved lighting levels. In terms of overall savings, we have shown a table which shows the overall savings from smart lighting for the past 18 months or so. This was based off Glen Ira, the 200 odd lights that were installed. We have now completed analysis and more extensive analysis on small rural councils with only 100 lights and big urban councils, and these numbers still stack up. The thing that is interesting about this is that there is a payback for smart lighting. And what smart lighting can do is deliver and fund a smart city infrastructure across a council area. So there aren't that many smart city projects which drive and deliver paybacks and can allow you to establish that backbone. But we are now seeing relatively consistently that the savings are there, and smart lighting can help you deliver and install an overall smart city backbone with the payback. However, metering, as many of you will know, in Australia for smart lighting, unmetered lighting, you can't actually get the financial savings coming through on your bill. This is a quirk, I guess, of the current knowledge and experience of the industry around metering. We have variously brought this up several times over the last few years, and there is a lot of work happening in various jurisdictions to try and deliver and change this. We are getting more confident over time. However, we are now seeing that we expect that in terms of allowing metering, it is likely there will be variance across jurisdictions. So some areas councils will gain the benefit of reduced bills from dimming earlier than other regions. And that is really just because of the design of smart systems and also the metering rules, where each smart city provider needs to have their system approved by a EMO. And so
Paul, I've got
that.
A question on that, sorry, and then you can finish and then answer whether other countries are seeing savings from smart metering come through on council electricity bills for their unmetered lights as well. Do you know?
Yes, that is happening in some areas and not in others. So this is not an unusual issue. For example, the National Metering Institute of Australia is actually writing some of the new rules globally around smart metering and small load metering, but exactly what we're talking about. The Australian National Metering Institute is leading some of the rule changes and rewriting some of the rules for other regions as well. But for example, in Los Angeles, they're dimming and trimming and able to get the benefit of those savings. And it's generally a jurisdictional issue, depends on where you are. But the vast majority of locations, unmetered lighting does not provide savings on energy bills. Okay, so however, we would be very surprised if within the next 2 years, most areas cannot access the savings. That is not the same as most areas having smart lighting systems embedded and installed and delivered. As we heard from Tom, it is a process that requires both the councils and the distributors to be quite engaged and working hard to drive and deliver these systems into street lighting. So the thing that will delay billing savings is more around that project delivery in each region, and that's the other reason why we think some councils will be able to access savings and some will not. All right. Let's go.
Well, before you move on, I'm just going to mention the slide that you can't see there. Of course, the reason there's that there is that The gentleman on the far left is David Ripper from AMO, and so they're the ones that we are certainly engaging with, and I know there are some multiple processes that you've mentioned to try and get this over the line, and it continues in the background. Back to you, Paul. You've at 11:41, just so you know.
Yep, aware of that. So in terms of DNSP street lighting, so there's a couple of things to keep in mind. One is that when discussing smart lighting to distributors, we strongly recommend, as Michelle illuminated us with earlier, that the council actually understand what outcomes they want from a smart city perspective. So a lot of councils these days have smart city strategies. This is an example of Townsville. And Townsville, for example, one outcome they may wish to achieve from smart city or smart lighting infrastructure is that they want to attract students from Southern Cross Uni to come out of the university and walk through the main town, have free Wi-Fi and buy coffee, i.e. economic development reasons. So a lot of the smart city strategies tend to be quite tailored and very targeted and designed for particular outcomes for their region or their towns. And having that backup of having thought through the smart city processes and outcomes within your region just means it's a lot easier to be very clear with the distributor when you're saying, here are some of the outcomes we're looking to achieve. How can we together benefit? If you want to know more about DNSP street lighting, pilots and other things, you should go to a webinar we ran in December, where we actually showed 12 different pilots, programs and outcomes from around the world. And there's a good hour or so going into great detail on that, but I won't spend any further on that now. In terms of council assets, getting organised is important. So that, as mentioned, that smart city strategy, there is a graph which Lex will display. What that graph is essentially saying is operating costs from different options to deliver LED and smart control systems. Once you have the overarching outcome that you want from the smart city system, then you can start focusing on a project. In this example project, BAU, the operating costs from that are much higher than either an LED project or an LED with smart controls. We are seeing a number of councils balking at the additional costs from smart controls, even though it's only marginally different, and the savings are greater over time. What councils should be thinking about is essentially an LED plus smart control project can install and deliver an ongoing backbone for your smart city system. So although there's a business case here, you shouldn't just be looking at the LED and the energy savings outcome. You should be thinking about those broader smart city outcomes. But what if you don't have a smart city strategy? You can start with the project, but what you will need to do is consult really well, slowly and carefully with other areas of your council, just to make sure they're aware of what you're doing. You're working through best practice around smart cities and what other councils are doing, and you're essentially creating a project-specific policy that can support overall and future smart city outcomes. Which then brings us to specifying projects. So in terms of specifying projects, these projects are a lot more complex for council assets than street lighting. So we're going to talk more about council assets. They are car parks, sporting grounds, a lot of pathways and outdoor areas. So the two things that are most important, the king and the queen of getting these ready, are lighting design, understanding where you need lighting and what level and at what times, and asset auditing. So understanding what it is that you have so that you can then consider how you're going to use and control them. Form a procurement perspective, then you need to cherry pick the best specifications. And typically that means looking at the 50 other councils who have put together specifications, as well as looking at other external specifications to then embed within your tender and RFQ documents. It's very much like a construction project. So the detailed design and understanding of what it is you're trying to deliver is a critical part of the process, and that is really the bulk of your tender specifications and documents, rather than standalone or independent specs.
Paul, there's a question here about saying that the SLSC doco is there, but do we use it, or are we critical of that? So I guess for you and the lighting team, do you use that as well for specifying projects?
Yes, so what we tend to do is we will first go back to the last or the most relevant council tender and specification that's been developed for council, for a council outdoor lighting project. We will keep an eye on and see whether there's been any updates to the SLSC spec, and we'll integrate those into those council specifications. I mean, obviously, I think the SLSC specs have changed once or twice in the last 2 or 3 years. So this technology is moving really quickly, and it's a really good resource, but you do need to embed them into your own specifications and then need to make sure it's up to date as well. So it does keep changing. And just to reinforce, the most important things are lighting design and asset auditing and specifying what it is that you need in your area. So a generic spec's useful to take information from, but it's not the same as defining a project and going out to market. All right, so wrapping that up, I might actually just jump straight to the last word, Slideplex, and we might introduce Josh from the City of Greater Geelong. Josh, are you there?
I am, Paul. How are you?
I am very good. Good to hear you. Perhaps if we can start with how things are going in the beautiful city of Geelong, and if you can tell us a little bit about your role and the project you're working on, that'd be great.
Yeah, no problem. We're all just got thrown into lockdown as well, like the rest of Melbourne, so lucky us. But things are going on okay with work. We're still business as usual, I guess. So yeah, our project is, we have about 25,000 public lights in our council, which includes Geelong and the surrounding regions. So that includes a fairly diverse mix of lighting requirements. We've got about 15,000 Cat Ps, which is largely the old 80 watt mercury vapors, a couple of thousand decorative, say around 4,000 Cat Vs, and then a remainder are just a mix of the newer type of fittings, like there's a chunk of LEDs in our newer developments. So our bulk lighting project aims to replace all of the non-efficient lighting with LEDs, including where possible all the decorative stuff that we've got, and with inclusion of smart controls across the entire network as well. So it's been a fairly long time coming, but at the moment we're about to commence our first stage, which is the standard Cat P lights, and we're about to, we're using the low wattage LEDs with NEMA smart cells for that first stage. But then for the second stage, which includes our Cat V lights and some of the higher profile areas, such as shopping strips and the like, we're hoping to use some newer technology, including the DALI 2.0 drivers and Zaga smart cells. So my involvement in the project, I guess, is I'm the project manager for our capital project team, and not having an expert in lighting, the project's fallen on our team. So my role is kind of to manage the overall delivery of the project, including development of the original business case and all the way through to installation and commissioning, obviously outsourcing any requirements that we don't have that expertise in.
And how is so obviously you're getting a lot of education and information about smart controls generally. How are you finding crafting a solution around smart controls, given that you've got so many lights that you're dealing with, both council owned and operated and distributor owned and operated. How are you feeling about that complexity of smart controls and the balance between what you're implementing on streets versus council owned assets in parks and gardens and other things?
Yeah, I guess it's been a bit of a developing process. So originally we didn't know whether we wanted to put smart controls out there or whether we wanted to just restrict it to some areas. We ended up going with the whole lot, just to get a clean sweep and have real full control over our asset, having full sight of what's out there, I guess. In terms of what we're doing with it in different areas, that's something which is still developing. We're having our own, I guess, internal workshops and the like. Just determining what we want to do with those smart controls in different areas. So it's definitely a growing space, but having the capacity across the whole council just opens up a whole lot of opportunities for us.
And is there variance between the solutions? Like you mentioned the NEMA cells for the Category P street lighting. What's the council's thinking around your open space assets?
Yeah, obviously there's a bit more control there because we own them and they're metered, so we can do whatever we want with them, and it's a little bit easier. So I spoke about the Dali and the Zaga socket. So we have kind of separated out the two areas, so having all of our just generic kind of residential streets, and we're happy to proceed to lock in some of the financial savings for some of those streets. So that's why we've proceeded with that first stage. But for those higher profile streets is why we want to try and get that top level technology in there so that we have full capacity to do anything in the future with.
Yeah, okay. So you essentially like a split of a simpler approach in the vast unwashed suburbs of Geelong, and then a more complex and higher level of service in some of your key areas.
Yeah, that's right. And I guess we ended up making that decision because the technology wasn't quite there. It wasn't quite approved, at least for that newer technology. But we wanted to we didn't want to hold off the project any more than we already have. So that's why we've gone ahead with the residential stuff with the current technology.
And how's it gone? So Powercore is your distributor. How has it gone negotiating what you've wanted with Powercore?
Yeah, that's right. So yeah, we're all Powercore, which is much easier than Michelle's circumstance, but generally they've been helpful and willing to accommodate our desires where possible. Obviously they're a private company, so they're profit driven, and they also operate across a large number of councils. So sometimes it's a bit difficult, I guess, to vary our project against the status quo. In terms of bulk lighting conversion, that's something that's not new to the DNSP, but the newer technology like the Dali and the Zaga, they weren't familiar, or they weren't as open about that technology until they learned a little bit more about it. So that's something we're still working on with them. But yeah, they've been helpful with as much as possible, I guess. It's just one of those things you need to work together as much as you can and as early as possible.
And how much support do you have within your council to navigate through smart lighting, smart cities? Is it something that's core business for council, or are you making it up as you go?
Yeah, it has been a bit of making it up as you go, I guess. We do have a smart cities team now. As they haven't previously been that interested in lighting, but they're definitely on board with this project in terms of broadening their assets across the city, I guess. So yeah, we've definitely got support from the council. It's one of our real positives, I guess, is trying to drive, we call it clever and creative down here, trying to have a clever and creative city. So this has been a big driver in that. And like originally we sold the project as a financial saving from the LEDs, but we packaged it up with the smart controls, and we're able to that's why we were able to get it included as a citywide rollout with the smart controls, by using those financial benefits from the LEDs and combining them together.
Sounds good. Is there anything, so you've been on this journey for 12, 18 months or thereabouts, and right in the thick of, starting to change lights and getting things moving. is there anything you would have liked to know or do differently 12 or 18 months ago? If you went back in time and got to tell your younger self?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so our normal business is kind of civil works and new buildings and stuff. So lighting certainly isn't an area that I had any knowledge in before. And I certainly didn't appreciate the complexity of our public lights in terms of technology options and also the ownership structure around maintenance and renewals and that kind of stuff. So to start with, I think I probably tried to take on too much of the responsibility internally, thinking it didn't seem that complex. But given the bulk change out is something, it's really a once-off activity and quite different to the other projects that we work on. I probably would have been more prudent to outsource some of that stuff, that early stuff, and get things fast track a little bit. So I've certainly learned a lot along the way, but it's probably not something that we need to concentrate on, and getting a little bit of that knowledge from people who do it every day would have been good a little bit earlier.
No worries. Okay, Josh, thanks for your time and good luck with the project. Lex,
yeah, no worries.
I might hand over to you to wrap up and see if there's any other questions.
Great. Many thanks, Paul, and thanks, Josh. There are a couple of questions that I'm going to smash through. And Josh, Michelle, and Tom, if you're on the line, feel free to jump in for some of them. The first one from Jesse in WA, who's asked, what would you venture a guess how long the dimming and the savings from dimmings might take in Western Australia from Western Power, a single distributor, to pass on the savings? So it is a bit different over there because WA are not part of the NEM, and I'm pretty sure not under AMO, but we'll check it out. And Jesse, happy to take it offline because we're doing a bit of work with working with Mel and the crew from Canning on next steps and working with Western Power about that. Paul, jump in if you know anything specific there. Otherwise, I'd suggest that's the best approach. Scott, what platform are most people using, e.g. LoRaWAN, 4G, etc.? Paul, do you want to start? And then Tom, Michelle, and Josh, if you guys want to unmute yourself and just give a 1 or 2 word answer, that'd be great.
It depends where you are. So in Victoria, for distributor assets, there is a smart meter network across the state. So distributors just connecting into that. In other regions, it's a mix bag. So in Queensland, for example, in the Ergon region, they would definitely look at a mix of 4G combined with some of the smart mesh networks that in more urban regions. It's a bit of horses for courses, depends where you are.
Probably answer to Michelle and Josh, or the Vic component there, contingent. Tom, did you want to add anything there?
Hi, sorry about the muting issue. We're focusing on the Icon solution at the moment. I'm actually going down to my car at the moment. Sorry about that.
Okay.
But we're also working with Road Transport Authority to look at Silenza and how we might get an overview of both of them. And we're integrating, or trying to integrate, some other LoRaWAN products. But we're very interested in NB-IoT as well, how that develops.
All right, Tom, we'll let you go so you're not driving and phoning. Just stay safe, don't leak windows and stuff, and we'll chat to you later. Jag from Melville, interested in the Connecting for WA discussion, absolutely will bring you in, and that is how it works. Councils are better off getting together, talking distribution businesses. I think there's a pretty clear theme there. In another webinar, we could talk to Tom from SA on how that worked with a bunch of leading councils in South Australia, Onkaparinka, Marion, Charles Sturt, have that group discussion. That's how you make change. Paul's got a question here. What's the cost of installing smart PE cells versus the cost of retrofitting them? Assuming also that the cost of the smart cell drops over time. Paul Brown, do you want to answer that one?
Yeah, so the install cost would be about $50 to $100 per light if you're doing it as a separate project. The assumption that the smart controls will drop over time is one we would like to see happen. Whether that actually eventuates or not, time will tell.
Thank you. 2 or 3 minutes left, so if people do want to jump in and ask questions, please do, and we'll obviously try and get them afterwards if need be, and you can ask any questions afterwards. We've tried to incorporate all of the pre-webinar questions within this webinar. I think we've got there. Paul, the other thing is, the other assumptions that you can take into account there are obviously around the EMO changes and savings. And so depending on your appetite for risk, you can discount the potential savings, I guess.
Interestingly,
when do you think you're going to get them? Yes.
So the curve that I showed earlier briefly on smart lighting versus just an LED project, that assumed the smart lighting savings didn't start for 2 years. So yeah, you can definitely do that in the modelling.
Great. Is management maintenance of system available as a service? Paul?
Well, obviously that's what I think this is the answer to the question. That's what distributors do, maintain and manage. In terms of council operated assets, there are a lot of contractors who offer maintenance services as well. It would depend on your region, and if people have specific queries about their region, happy to provide comments on that, depending on where it is.
Final question from Barry. Do all smart sensor systems require communication hubs that add to smart sensor system costs?
Yes, so they all need a communication network. A lot of them already have that network in place, though, so you're not necessarily adding it on. And again, depending on where you are, and there are private providers who have already gone out and put in smart communication networks in most of the major cities, for example.
Great. Thanks, Paul. We might wrap it up there. We've got one more webinar in this series next week, and we've got guests from Penrith talking about their broad strategy, and also the University of Melbourne, Teresa Jones, talking about the incorporation of biodiversity and human health into lighting design, which should be pretty awesome. Please do jump in and give us your feedback as well. We'll email straight after this webinar feedback form. You saw the feedback at the start. We do try and take it on board. I think the first thing we'll do for the next one is possibly make it a bit of a longer webinar, maybe add an extra 15, 20 minutes to the end. Otherwise, thanks Paul Brown, especially for doing that unseen. That's quite an awesome effort. Michelle Van Gerering from Darebin, Josh Salter from Geelong, and Tom Walker from Sapin. We'll see you at the next one. Enjoy the rest of your day.